Hello once again. We're here to talk about the Ticats season opener against the Calgary Stampeders. Ticats going down 28-14, a score that bizarrely irreflective of the game in the sense that it is both flattering and indicting of the Ticats play, to be honest, because you had a very close game heading into the fourth quarter, and the Ticats just kind of failed and let this one slip away towards the end. But at the same time, you could argue that they should have been further behind. And the reason for that is the fact that the Ticats defense played relatively poorly in the first quarter into about the halfway through the second quarter. And Bo Levi Mitchell being kind of off his game. I mean, you don't get many days where Bo Levi Mitchell goes 17 of 36, 297 yards. The yardage is okay. 1 touchdown, 1 interception. But the completion rating of 47.2% is, noticeably bad, and it wasn't because the Ticats secondary did a great job. I'm going to be talking a lot about the Ticats secondary over the course of this video. Now, let's talk about the positives of the game. Jeremiah Masoli played quite well through the first half. Very efficient offense, high completion percentage. Finished up the game with pretty decent numbers, 25 of 36 for 344 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. The failure to punch it into the end zone, a little bit concerning, but, had our touchdowns as well, with Masoli running for 1. So the offense needs to cap off drives better, but has the ability to move the ball, particularly being considered there's really no running game in the Hamilton Ticat arsenal right now. And a lot of people are talking about the Nikita Whitlock experiment being a failure and so on. And I'm not the biggest fan of the Nikita Whitlock experiment. I want to make that quite clear. But I don't think you can say that it fails when you have 2 plays drawn up for it, 2 carries, 16 yards. I don't really know what more you want the guy to do to kind of prove what he got to deliver to the team. Now, does the combination of him and Mercer Timmis in the backfield limit what you can do offensively considerably? Yes, they're both guard-to-guard runners. They're not really going to go outside. The defense knows how to contain them, where they're going to go. And the fact that you have no variation on that is a problem. I mean, it handicaps your running game, makes it predictable, and honestly, Kent Austin-like. Last season, we did a lot better with the run game with Alex Green, CJ Gable towards the end of the season. And when Alex Green gets back, a lot of that does get fixed. But this does highlight, I think, a problem that there were a number of cuts in the preseason that I didn't really agree with. Specifically in this case, the cutting of Storm Johnson, who I thought could do quite well as the number 2 to Alex Green. And then you've got Nikita Whitlock, if you want, as a third option, and Mercer Timmis in the mix as well. So, him being gone, the fact that you're only carrying 1 import running back that's a proper running back, and he gets hurt, and there's not a lot of depth there. And this also goes to the offensive line with the tackle situation, because you have Riker Matthews on one end and Tony Washington on the other one. By the way, Riker Matthews had a fantastic game. Great work by the right tackle. Tony Washington had a pretty solid game. But what happens if either of those guys get hurt? Because right now, the options are Everett Williams and Kai Okafor and Landon Rice. I'm not really overly confident in any of those options. I mean, they're Canadian talent, good depth players, but they really shouldn't be your go-to at the tackle spots. I think it would be a big blow. So, while I praise what the offensive line did in this game, I thought Darius Scirocco played a very good game. I thought Riker Matthews played a very good game. Mike Filer, Brandon Revenberg, Tony Washington. I put that unit up against almost anything in the league, but I don't put our second unit up against anything in the league. And that's the problem, because, you've got Landon Rice as your 6th man. Then it's Brett Golding, Brandon Schramm, the aforementioned Williams and Okafor. Just not a lot of depth there, and that's a bit of a concern. And this kind of goes throughout the team. I mean, you got June Jones in his first season as a head coach in the CFL, first full season. You got Glanville as your defensive coordinator, his first season in the CFL, I do believe, as a defensive coordinator. And you got rid of a lot of veteran help, particularly in the secondary. And DeMond Washington recently being released. Yeah, I know he has some injury problems, and I know we're bringing in Delvin Breaux, and I think that helps a lot. But the departure of Washington, the departure of Abdul Kanay, the fact that you're running Courtney Stevens as a backup safety and not playing him on like a corner or something, 30 games of total experience in the secondary that went into this game. has a lot of concerns when you consider that you also have a very inexperienced head defensive coordinator running the whole thing. And I think it showed. Like, I think realistically, Levi Mitchell had a pretty poor game, and they put up 28 points against us. There's not a lot of positives to glean on the defensive end of things. I think that, sure, Larry Dean played a very strong game, put up 5 tackles. Simone Lawrence had a pretty good game outside of, intercepting our own ball. I think you got Richard Leonard back there who's going to be very good. I think Jamal Roll. I think Frankie Williams. I think that Carriel Brooks, who had the interception, they all showed moments of very solid things. This is not a Justin Rogers situation, not a Chris Davis situation last season where we had continuously guys who didn't seem to really have any kind of redeeming moments out there. So, that's better. But just the one sack, very young secondary. There's got to be a rework on how this plays are being called. And, of course, on the offensive side of the ball, I think you need a running game to be part of it. I know people are like, okay, you're not going to 50-50 run. I'm not asking for a 50-50 run. I'm asking for your starting running back to get more than 2 carries. That's what I'm asking for. In the attack through the air, things look pretty good. Mike Jones had a very solid game. Jalen Saunders, Luke Tasker had a very solid game. I'm not worried about Brandon Banks, despite only 19 yards. Did have the 4 catches. That's not alarming. I think obviously he'll be fine. And then when Terrence Tolliver gets back and healthy, there's, a pretty good receiving core there, even if it's a bit undersized because, of course, Jones, Saunders, Tasker, Banks, all sub 6 feet tall receivers. So there's definitely some shortcomings there, but they're, they make up for with, great playmaking ability, great hands really around the horn. Except not so much Brandon Banks. I've never rated his hands as particularly high, but a very good playmaker. Mike Jones, also not a great hands guy, but very, very fast, can make some plays happen. A lot of people are praising Mike Jones. I would caution holding up on that a little bit because he started last season very, very well. Like 5 weeks into the season, he was the Ticats' leading receiver. And then as the time went on, he became less effective, less a part of the offense, and of course had the PED suspension. So I would caution that this could be a false dawn on Mike Jones. Don't get too hyped up on what he can do. But there's a lot of potential there. He's very fast. He's actually got pretty decent hands. Not fantastic hands. But he does remind me a little bit of Chris Bauman. Not in the sense of anything really physically similar. Bauman was a very large receiver who never in his CFL career really figured out that he had to fight for balls, that the defensive backs were bigger than what he was used to dealing with, faster, and the ball wasn't going to be so easy for him. And he never really conditioned himself to fixing that. I'm hoping Mike Jones doesn't end up like that, although it is a very different problem. Obviously, Mike Jones is an undersized receiver, but I think he's one that's used to being a lot faster than the guys covering him. That's not necessarily the case in the CFL. Let's talk about the big news, of course, that Jeremiah Masoli threw that interception in the fourth quarter. A lot of people, I think, are overreacting to that. They're stating that this is the proof that Jeremiah Masoli is not the starter. We need to go with Johnny Manziel. I know I've come across as a very anti-Johnny Manziel guy, and I'm not even going to say that that's a false narrative, because I think it's a very true narrative. I don't think that a guy who's being coached through giving good responses really proves you anything. And that's my thing. Once the reality that he was going to have to play in the CFL or play nowhere sunk in, he started giving the right answers, but that's when the agent would start coaching him. That's probably when the Ticats started coaching him in responses as well. I think it's kind of ridiculous to give him such a free pass on that. It's kind of like, to compare this to another sport, the UFC recently is working through this whole deal with Greg Hardy being in the UFC. Now, Greg Hardy's crimes are much more substantial, a deeper history of domestic abuse, more harder drugs, etc. But the core root of their behavior is not necessarily different. And you're seeing when Greg Hardy's not being prepped and not being handled, he's not giving you the responses you want. The difference here is Johnny Manziel is being handled. I'm not saying that Johnny Manziel is not taking this as a second chance. I'm not saying that he's not a changed man. I'm not saying that he's not remorseful. I'm just saying I think a lot of people are buying into what is a very obvious pro athlete rehabilitation tour 101 stuff, and they're really taking it at face value when you should really look deeper to that. In terms of on the football field, there were a lot of people that I was talking to and hearing on the fifth quarter with Rick Zamperin saying that he's like he's not going to throw interceptions. He's the big solution to the problem, and really overblowing that one interception by Masoli. I want to really look at the numbers here. Masoli, 5 interceptions in 10 starts last season. Johnny Manziel, 7 interceptions in 8 starts in the NFL. The concern with Johnny Manziel coming into pro football was that how is he going to handle the more intricate strategies defenses use, the more motion, the more everything about that, which is exasperated by the CFL game. I think if you think he's going to come in, he's not going to throw picks is insane. I think throwing 1 pick per game isn't even really the end of the world. Yeah, it hurt. It sucked. It bummed. Yes, Masoli has somewhat of a history of not performing when the pressure's been on the brightest, but he's also performed very well at times when that pressure has been on. So I think that calling for Masoli's head after 1 game, I think is ridiculous, especially when you look at outside of that play, what was a very solid game. 25 of 36, 69.4% completion rating, 344 yards, more yards, better completion rating than Bo Levi Mitchell, arguably the best quarterback in the CFL in the game. That's kind of ridiculous. I mean, that would be like Calgary has more reason. Calgary fans have more reason to say that Bo Levi Mitchell needs to be replaced based on this game than the Hamilton Ticat fans have to demand Jeremiah Masoli be replaced by Johnny Manziel. We're, I think, looking at Johnny Manziel as this silver bullet that there is no evidence, none whatsoever, to suggest that he actually is. And it's getting me worked up. And that's because it's kind of the thing. Right now, at this point in the season, I think we're dealing with a lot of just dumb assertions that aren't necessarily backed up by fact. And that may include some of my own. But right now, off of 1 game, what I see is that the play calling on offense probably needs to involve the run game more, keep defenses unbalanced, because we saw in the second half, Calgary's defense made some adjustments, started to really shut down the Ticat offense, and that led to largely the loss because, frankly, giving up 28 points the way our defense was playing actually wasn't terrible. I mean, that's the huge difference here. Masoli outpassed Bo Levi Mitchell, but you have a running game that had Don Jackson, 12 carries, 87 yards, 7 carries, 33 yards for Terry Williams, as opposed to the Ticats, who had 6 carries for 20 yards for Mercer Timmis, most popular carry man. I like Mercer Timmis, he's from my hometown. But it has to be said that, while he's a decent power back, I think that him and Whitlock is just a really poor option in the backfield. I mean, we're talking about a guy who last season rushed, 5 times for 20 yards. In his career has 14 carries, 46 yards. He's the feature back right now, basically. Or the feature back is Nikita Whitlock, who had 2 carries for 16 yards in his game. I don't think that's necessarily a failed experiment again, but I would much prefer that we had a more proven option there, or a more generic fitting option that can spread the defense a little bit more. And if that Storm Johnson could have been that guy with Alex Green down, but we got rid of him. Jeremiah Masoli, 2 carries for 12 yards, 2 carries for 8 yards for Sean Thomas Erlington. Actually, I thought the 7-yard run by Erlington demanded maybe some more carries. We'll see if he works his way in there. It's an interesting thing starting this extra Canadian. They justified it on the TSN broadcast that meant that Justin Capicotti could come out and be replaced by Julian Hauscher. That's good, but I think that realistically, one would think that we've got to bring another import starter, whether that's Terrence Tolliver being the guy who takes over that 5th receiver spot, or we find a non-import offensive lineman to help out. And the other thing is, you can get away with this by starting Courtney Steven at the corner. I think that if you're not going to throw to Felix Faubert-Lucier, who was the starting 5th receiver, that extra Canadian, as it were, I don't understand the point of having him out there. Maybe it's just because Terrence Tolliver was hurt, but I would have enjoyed seeing Bryce Wilkerson out there instead to see what he could do. And again, some weird cuts in the receiving core with Shakir Ryan going away, and Willie Quinn III. Just, it was a bit of a weird offseason, and the Ticats are kind of famous for this to a degree, so it's not like new with June Jones or anything. I'm cautiously optimistic about the season. I think that, like I said, despite the concerns about the secondary having 30 games combined coming into the season, there were individual signs of promise and solid play but I'm not a huge believer in Glanville's scheme working out in the long run, especially with such two rookies, second-year man Rashard Leonard, guy who's barely more than a rookie, Carriel Brooks out there, bit harsh, bit problematic. I thought that the return game actually looked very good. I thought, again, Sean Thomas Erlington did a good job. I thought Jackson Bennett did a very good job. I thought Frankie Williams did a good job on the punt returns as well. So kudos to the special teams. I think they're doing a great job. I think we have a solid kicking game as well. So there's reasons to be cautiously optimistic, but on defense we need to figure out how to generate more pressure on the quarterback and hope that this is just a case of Calgary's O-line doing a fantastic job as opposed to schematic problems or personnel problems. I don't think it's necessarily personnel problems because I have a relatively large amount of faith in Justin Capicotti and Adrian Tracy as ends. I think Julian Hauscher looked very good in the preseason and was the guy who got the sack here in this game. You've got Simone Lawrence, Larry Dean, and the linebacking core like that. Front seven is pretty damn good, which, by the way, is another option to start a Canadian is Nick Shortle. So it's kind of weird is like the Canadian talent is very, very good on this team. I think there's a lot of potential starters, but the fact that we're utilizing, Felix Faubert-Lucier, I like Felix Faubert-Lucier, a guy who can be a backup kicker, a guy who plays his ass off on special teams, but last season it was pretty obvious that we weren't really all that interested in throwing to him, and to have him out there for a large number of the plays, teams are just kind of getting a free pass on that. If we want another Canadian, I would have liked to see us go after Rob Bagg, who I think still has a little bit something to give and was cut by Saskatchewan. But obviously a guy who may come with a price tag. I don't know. So it's obviously a better start than last season, where there was very, very little hope to come across, but I think that some fans do need to ease it back a bit on the Johnny Manziel train. Now, if we get to like week 5 and we're like 0-5 and Masoli's not really generating, then obviously I'm okay with going with the Manziel route. I'm not saying he's not the answer, but I'm saying that the factual basis for him being the answer is pretty limited. There's a reason he did. I mean, in fairness, he was on the Cleveland Browns, which have been an absolute place where quarterbacks have gone to die over the last 20 years, frankly. Basically my entire lifespan. But there are also some things with his attitude and the way he plays the game that I think have to be rounded off before we can realistically look at him as starting a quarterback option. I think at some point we'll see that, but I don't think now is the time. So that was the Ticats versus Stampeders, 28-14 loss. Like I said, it's a game of contractions where the defense played pretty poorly to the start. It got its ass together kind of in the middle 2 quarters, and then kind of had some moments in the 4th quarter where they didn't deliver. The offense started very strong in the first half, couldn't adjust in the second half, so adjustments are key. Figuring out a little bit more in terms of defensive scheme, working the run game in a little bit more would be advisable. We will see what happens in week 2 of the CFL. Just to go through the other scores, because we might as well have a look at how the rest of the league is doing. Without that knowledge, we aren't actually going to really know a lot. So in week 1, we had a pretty significant battle between Edmonton and Winnipeg. Edmonton coming up 33-30 victors there. Saskatchewan Roughriders beating the Toronto Argonauts, doing us a favor, 27-19, and the BC Lions beating the Montreal Alouettes 22-10, so no wins for the Eastern Conference. That's, I guess, the good thing. Next week, we're going to go to Edmonton, so it's a really tough start to the season with the 2 Alberta games, and then coming home in week 3 to face off with Winnipeg, which looks like a pretty strong team as well this season. It's going to be interesting. I'm very intrigued. Before I go, actually, I just want to pull up maybe what Drew Willie did in the Montreal game, because as much as their divisional rival, etc., it would be nice to see Montreal figure out some of its stuff and get in competitive, because I want to see a competitive Eastern Conference. I want to see it rebound. I want to see the Ticats winning the Eastern Conference, getting to the playoffs, meaning something more than it has in recent years. And Drew Willie 25 of 35, 71.4. Decent numbers. One touchdown, one interception. Outdid Jonathan Jennings actually by a fair bit. Interesting that they lost 22-10. Didn't get to watch the entire game. Kind of went to bed, but I was watching early on. And Montreal had been starting pretty well. Don't know what happened. You didn't score any points in the remaining 3 quarters. Interesting. Might want to go back and watch that game, see what's up. So, yeah, we're up against Edmonton next week. Hopefully it goes better. Hopefully we can pick up a win there. It would be huge to beat the Eskimos. But I do have some significant concerns going up against an Edmonton receiving core that is deadly as all hell. If Mike Riley is on his game, that could be an interesting test of the young secondary in Hamilton right now. Let's see what the Edmonton receivers did against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Darrell Walker, massive game, 8 catches for 176. Duke Williams, 4 for 74 yards. Kenny Stafford, 5 for 68.9. Vidal Hazelden, 4 for 37. That's a scary 4-man receiving core right there, guys. That is a scary receiving core. Also, former Ticat CJ Gable, 9 carries, 40 yards. I will be sour grapes about basically the entire stay of CJ Gable in Hamilton. He took a lot of unnecessary flack about how much of a quality running back he was when we just didn't utilize him. And if he torches us, there's going to be part of me that's going to cheer that. But there's also going to be part of me that's very let down because I'm a Ticat fan through and through. I've been through some of the worst times that imaginable, the Anthony Calvillo years, the Matt Dunnigan time period, and going back to when we had Larry Justanis briefly as our starting quarterback. So I'm in for the long haul regardless of how things go. We'll see what happens next week. Hopefully we can make this a turnaround. Have a good day and enjoy the next game, regardless of how it looks.